I was 8 months pregnant, broke and humiliated when the man I loved walked out of my door with another woman. So I ran. I booked the first escape I could find, a sailing trip. Just me, the ocean, and what was left of my dignity. But when I stepped onto the wrong yacht and came face to face with a cold, intimidating Korean CEO who made it very clear I was not welcome, I had no idea that the next 7 days would completely destroy and rebuild everything I thought I knew about love. And on the 7th night, with no hospital, no midwife, and nothing but open ocean around us, my son came 4 weeks too early. What happened next was a race against time, open water, and every odds stacked against us. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that subscribe button for Afri-Seoul right now. Every single subscribe helps this channel grow and reach more beautiful souls who love stories just like this one. Now, let's get into it. Before the ocean there was Daniel. Let me tell you about the man who broke me before I tell you about the man who found me. His name was Daniel. And for 2 years, I genuinely believed he was the love of my life. He was charming in the way that dangerous men always are, attentive when he needed to be, sweet when it suited him, and always saying the right thing at exactly the right moment. I was raised in a wealthy home. My father built his business from nothing, and by the time I was in my 20s, I had never known real lack. I did not think that made me naive. I thought I was careful. I thought I was smart. I thought I could read people. Daniel taught me how wrong I was. He proposed after a year of dating. A beautiful ring, a rooftop dinner, tears in his eyes that looked so real I still cannot think about them without feeling something crawl under my skin. I said yes. Of course I said yes. 6 months later I found out I was pregnant, and even though it was earlier than we planned, I was happy. I was so deeply, recklessly happy. I thought this was it. I thought this was the beginning of everything I had ever wanted. But here is what I did not know. While I was planning our future, Daniel was sleeping with his coworker Claire. Not once. Not twice. For months. The entire pregnancy. Every appointment I attended alone because he was working late. Every night he came home smelling like someone else's perfume that I convinced myself was from a client dinner. Every single moment I spent trusting him, he was somewhere else, choosing her. And then my father found out who Daniel really was. My father was a quiet man, but he was not a foolish one. He did his research. He made some calls. And one afternoon he sat me down and told me that the man I was engaged to had debts I knew nothing about, a character I had never been allowed to see, and intentions that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with the life my family name could give him. My father cut me off completely. He said he would not fund a future built on a lie, and he needed me to see Daniel without the comfort of money softening the view. It was the most painful gift anyone has ever given me. Within weeks of my father pulling his support, Daniel changed. The calls grew shorter. The excuses grew longer. The warmth drained out of him like water through a cracked glass. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself we were both adjusting. I told myself a lot of things that I no longer believe. And then one evening, 7 months into my pregnancy, I came home to my own apartment and found Claire sitting on my couch. Comfortable. Like she belonged there. Like I was the one who had walked into the wrong place. Daniel stood across the room and looked at me with eyes that held no shame at all. None. He looked at me the way you look at a problem you have finally decided to stop pretending to solve. And then he said something I will never forget for as long as I live. He said, "I think you always knew this wasn't real." He left with her that night. 7 months pregnant. Alone in an apartment that suddenly felt like a crime scene. No fiancé. No financial support. Nothing but a baby growing inside me who had done nothing wrong and deserved a mother who had not just had her entire world pulled from underneath her. I did not cry that night. I sat on the floor of my kitchen and I just breathed. In and out. In and out. Like breathing was the only thing I was still sure I knew how to do. And then 3 weeks later, I did something that everyone in my life told me was reckless and irresponsible and frankly insane for a woman in my condition. I booked a sailing trip. Not because I had a plan. Not because I thought the ocean would fix anything. But because I needed to feel like I was moving. Like I was going somewhere. even if I had no idea where that somewhere was. I packed a bag, I called a cab, and I went to the marina before I could talk myself out of it. I want you to stay with me here because what happens next is where everything changes. And I mean everything. The marina was busy that morning. Boats lined up like quiet promises, the smell of salt in the air so sharp it almost felt like a slap. A good slap. The kind that wakes you up. I had my booking confirmation on my phone. Berth 7, vessel Seabreeze, departure 9 a.m. I walked the length of the dock counting the numbers. 6, 7. There was a boat. A beautiful one. Much more beautiful than I expected for what I had paid, but I was tired and my feet were swollen and my back had been aching since 5 a.m. I did not question it. I walked up the boarding ramp with my one bag over my shoulder and my hand on my belly, and I told myself, this is a new beginning. This is you choosing yourself. I found a cabin below deck. Clean white linen, a porthole window, soft afternoon light coming in at an angle. I set my bag down. I sat on the edge of the bed. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. And then the door opened. He was tall, sharply dressed in a way that felt almost aggressive, like his clothes were also working for him. Dark eyes that moved across the room with the kind of efficiency that belongs to people who are never wasted a second of their lives on uncertainty. He looked at me sitting on his bed with my overnight bag at my feet and my very obvious pregnant belly, and his entire face went still. Not angry. Not shocked. Just utterly, completely still. He said one sentence. He said, "Who are you and what are you doing on my yacht?" Not a question. A statement. The kind of sentence a man says when he already expects the answer to be wrong. My name is Olivia. I said it like it meant something. Like I had not spent the last 3 weeks feeling like a woman whose name had been erased. He told me his name was Woo-suk Kong. He told me I was on a private chartered vessel and that whatever booking I had made was clearly an error. He told me, calmly and without any visible emotion, that I would need to gather my things immediately. I looked at him. I looked at the dock through the porthole. And I felt the boat move. We had already left the marina. I want you to imagine that feeling for a second. Standing in a cabin on a boat you accidentally boarded, 7 months pregnant with nowhere to go, facing a man who looked like he had never been inconvenienced in his life and was not about to start now. That was my entire life in that one moment. Every mistake I had ever made compressed into a single terrible second. I told him the boat had already departed. He pulled out his phone immediately, made a call, spoke quickly in a mix of English and Korean to someone on the other end. When he hung up, his jaw was tight. Turning back would cost significant time and money. His itinerary, apparently, was not something that could be adjusted. He had meetings on the water, calls scheduled, a week of strategic isolation planned down to the hour. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at my stomach. Then he looked away like the sight of it was something he did not know how to process. He told me I could stay, but there were conditions. His suite had 2 rooms separated by a sitting area. I would take the smaller room. I would not interrupt his calls. I would not touch anything that was not mine. I would not expect conversation. He said all of this like he was reading from a contract. I said fine, because what choice did I have? And honestly, if I am being truthful with you right now, some small stubborn part of me was almost relieved. At least I was moving. At least something was happening. At least the ocean was big enough that even the weight I was carrying felt a little smaller. What I did not know yet was that the man standing across from me, rigid, controlled, untouchable, was carrying something too. Something the ocean had not been able to wash away no matter how many times he came out here alone. I would not find that out until day 4. And by then, everything had already started to shift. Keep watching. Because day 2 is where the silence between us started to crack. I did not sleep well that first night. The boat moved in ways my body was not used to, and the baby, who had recently taken to treating my ribs like a percussion instrument, was restless. I lay in the small room listening to the ocean and thinking about Daniel, about Claire on my couch, about my father's face when he told me the truth, about the way an entire life can rearrange itself in a single evening and leave you somewhere completely unrecognizable by morning. When I came out of my room at around 6 a.m., Woo-suk was already awake, already dressed. already on his laptop at the small table near the window, with a cup of black coffee going cold beside him because he had clearly forgotten it existed the moment work appeared on his screen. He did not look up when I came in. I went to the small kitchen area and found that someone, presumably the single crew member running the vessel, had left fruit and bread and boiled eggs on the counter. I made myself a plate. I stood at the counter and ate slowly because sitting down felt too much like claiming space I had not been given permission to claim. Then I dropped an egg. It hit the floor with a crack that sounded enormous in the silence of that suite. I bent down awkwardly to pick it up and immediately felt the pull in my lower back that reminded me loudly and without any sympathy that bending was no longer something my body did gracefully. I grabbed the counter. Steadied myself. When I looked up, Woo-suk was standing. He had moved from the table to the kitchen without making a sound, and he was holding the broken egg with a paper towel, dropping it in the bin before I could register what had happened. He straightened up. He looked at me. He said nothing. He went back to his table. That was it. That was the whole moment. 3 seconds, no words, no expression on his face that I could read. And yet I stood in that kitchen for a full minute afterward just processing what had happened. He had not said, "Are you okay?" He had not made a fuss. He had just quietly fixed the problem and gone back to his life. I did not know why that made my throat feel tight. I told myself it was the hormones. The rest of the day passed in careful, deliberate distance. He worked. I read. He took calls in rapid Korean that I understood nothing of but could feel the weight of the tension in his voice, the long pauses where he was clearly listening to something difficult. The way he rubbed the back of his neck when he finally ended a call and sat very still for a moment before going back to his screen. By evening I noticed he had moved a blanket and a pillow to the couch in the sitting area without saying anything about it. He was giving me the full bedroom. He had not told me. He had not offered it like it was a kindness. It was just done. Quietly, practically, without ceremony. I lay in bed that night and I thought, who is this man? I did not have an answer yet. But I was starting to understand that whatever I had assumed about him when I saw him standing in that doorway, cold and controlled and impossible, I had not seen the full picture. Not even close. And here is what I need you to understand before we get to day 3. The people who show you who they are without announcing it are the ones you need to pay attention to. Because what Woo-suk Kang did without words in those first 2 days was more than Daniel had done with 2 years of them. Stay with me. Because day 3 is where he finally starts to talk. And what he says, and what he does not say, will change how you see everything that comes after. I was sitting on the deck just after noon watching the water when he came and stood beside me. Not close. A respectful distance. He had his coffee, and he looked out at the horizon like it was something he needed to look at carefully, like it might move if he stopped paying attention. We stood like that for maybe 5 minutes. Just the sound of water and wind. Then he said, "How far along are you?" 7 months. I told him. Nearly 8. He nodded slowly. He did not say anything for another minute. Then he said, "You are traveling alone." It was not a question either. He had a way of speaking that was less about asking and more about giving you room to confirm what he had already observed. I told him yes. I told him it was a last-minute decision. I did not explain why. He did not push. But then I surprised myself. I do not know if it was the ocean or the fact that he was a stranger I would never have to face again after this week, but I said I needed to feel like I was going somewhere. Even if I did not know where. He turned and looked at me then. Really looked at me. Like he was reading something I had written on my face without meaning to. He said, "I understand that." 3 words. And somehow they landed with more weight than a whole speech would have. I asked him why he came out here alone. He looked back at the horizon. He was quiet for so long I thought he had decided not to answer. Then he said, "Because it is the only place where nothing is expected of me." There it was. Just like that. The first real piece of him. I did not ask him to explain. I just nodded. Because some things you understand not because someone describes them to you, but because you have felt the same thing in your own chest at some point. We stood there for another while, and then he asked me if I wanted anything to eat, and I said I was craving something warm, and he went inside without another word, and 15 minutes later there was a bowl of instant ramen on the table with an egg cracked into it that He had clearly figured out from the provisions on board. Not restaurant food. Not impressive in any way. The most thoughtful thing anyone had done for me in months. I want you to pay attention to something here because it matters for everything that comes later. Woo-suk Kang never once tried to be impressive. He never performed kindness. He just did things. Quietly. Practically. Like taking care of the person in front of him was simply the logical response to them being there. I had spent 2 years with a man who performed love beautifully and meant none of it. And here was this closed-off, controlled stranger on a boat in the middle of the ocean making me ramen and meaning every grain of it. Something in me that had been locked very tightly since the night Daniel left began, very slowly, to loosen. I did not let it show. I was not ready. But it loosened. What happens on day 4 is going to shift everything. Because the storm that's coming is not just the one in the weather forecast. Do not go anywhere. I felt the weather change before I saw it. The air went heavy around mid-morning. The boat began to move differently beneath us, not the gentle rhythm I had gotten used to but something more urgent, more unsettled. By early afternoon the sky had turned a color I had no word for. Not gray, not black. Something between them that felt alive. The crew member, a quiet older man named Rashid, secured everything on deck with the practiced speed of someone who had done this many times and did not need to be told. Woo-suk came out of his room where he had been on a call and looked at the sky once. Just once. Then he looked at me. He said, "Go inside." Not unkindly, but firmly. The way you speak when there is no time for anything else. I went inside. The boat pitched. I grabbed the door frame. My stomach dropped in the way that had nothing to do with the baby and everything to do with the sudden raw understanding that we were very small and the ocean was very large. Woo-suk came in behind me and guided me to the interior seat, the one bolted to the floor, and he sat beside me without asking. Not close enough to be inappropriate. Close enough that when the boat lurched hard to the left and I grabbed whatever was nearest, what was nearest was his arm. I held it. I did not let go. I expected him to stiffen, to gently remove my grip, to put distance back between us the way he had been maintaining it for 4 days. He did not move. He sat completely still and let me hold on. The storm lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of the ocean reminding us that it owed us nothing. 3 hours of wind that sounded like something screaming. 3 hours of me, a woman who had told herself she was strong, who had walked out of her own home after the worst night of her life without crying, sitting in a boat with a stranger's arm in my grip, terrified and somehow, somewhere underneath the terror, aware that I was not alone. When it passed, the sky cleared with a suddenness that felt almost theatrical. Like the ocean had made its point and decided we could have the light back now. Woo-suk looked at me. There was something different in his face. Something had come loose in him too. The absolute control he wore like a second skin had shifted during those 3 hours. Not gone, but different. He asked if I was all right. I said yes. I asked if he was all right. And the way he paused before he answered, the way he looked at me like nobody had asked him that in a very long time, told me more about who Woo-suk Kang was than anything that came before. He said, "I am now. I need you to stay right here with me because what he tells me on day 5, what he finally lets out of him after years of keeping it locked down, is going to make you understand why this man was on that boat alone in the first place. And it is going to make everything that comes after hit completely differently. We are only halfway through this story. And it is about to go somewhere neither of us expected." Day 5 was quiet. The storm had taken something out of the air. All the tension and distance that had lived between us for 4 days had been replaced by something softer. Something careful. Like two people who had been through something together and were not quite sure yet what to do with what that meant. We talked more that day than in all the previous days combined. It started over breakfast. I asked him about his company. He told me about it, not in the way someone performs success, but in the way someone describes something they genuinely built with their hands and their years. A shipping empire that started as a single logistics contract his father gave him when he was 24, before his father died, before he had to figure out how to hold an entire company together while grieving. He said that last part so quietly I almost missed it. I said, "You lost your father while running the company." He said yes. He said his father died 18 months into his tenure as CEO. He said he did not grieve properly. He said there was too much to do and grief was a luxury the company could not afford, so he put it somewhere he could manage it, and he had been managing it in the same place ever since. I thought about Daniel. About how I had also put things in places I could manage. About how that never really works. About how the things you manage instead of feel have a way of finding you eventually. I told him about Daniel. Not everything. Not the whole forensic breakdown I have just shared with you. But enough. The pregnancy. The other woman. The way he looked at me when he left. The way I booked this trip because I needed to feel like I was moving. He listened. He did not say I am sorry as a reflex the way people do when they are not really listening. He waited until I was done. And then he said, he did not deserve to be the reason you stopped moving. I looked at him. He said, you are the one on a boat in the middle of the ocean 7 months pregnant. That is not the action of a woman who has been broken. That is the action of a woman who refuses to be. I did not know what to do with that. I had not thought of myself that way. I had thought of myself as someone running away. He was suggesting I was someone running toward. That those two things can look identical from the outside, but feel completely different from the inside, and the difference is everything. I cried a little. Not dramatically. Just quietly, the way you cry when something true reaches you somewhere you had not expected. He did not look away. He did not make me feel small for it. He just sat with me in it, which is the rarest and most important thing one person can offer another. By evening we had been talking for 6 hours. He told me about Suyeon, his younger sister. The one who refused to go into the family business, who trained as a midwife because she said she wanted to be present at beginnings rather than managing the middle of things. He said she was the only person in his life who talked to him like a human being rather than a title. He smiled when he talked about her. It completely changed his face. I stored that image somewhere quiet inside me and did not examine why. That night I could not sleep again. But it was different from the first night. The first night, I lay awake heavy with grief. This night, I lay awake with something that felt unfamiliar and a little frightening. Something that felt a lot like hope. Day 6 is where it gets complicated. Where feelings meet reality. Where two people who were only supposed to share a suite for 7 days start to reckon with the fact that the week is almost over and neither of them is ready for that. Keep watching. There is a particular kind of tension that lives in the space between two people who both feel something and neither of them is willing to say it out loud. It is not uncomfortable exactly. It is charged. Every small thing carries weight. The way he passed me a glass of water that morning and his hand stayed near mine a second longer than it needed to. The way I caught him watching me from across the room and neither of us looked away fast enough. The way conversation kept starting and stopping, like we were both building up to something neither of us had the language for yet. We both knew that tomorrow was day 7. We both knew day 7 was the last day. The boat would turn back toward the marina and this strange suspended week between two broken people on the open ocean would fold back into real life, and real life had very little room for whatever this was. He asked me in the afternoon what my plans were. After the trip. After the baby. I told him I was figuring it out. My apartment was still mine for another 2 months. My father had softened slightly since Daniel left, not enough to resume full financial support, but enough that the conversation was open again. I had freelance work I could return to. I had a friend named Zara who had already turned her spare room into a nursery just in case. He listened to all of it carefully. Then he said, "You have more than you think." I asked him what he meant. He said, "You are listing your resources like they are barely enough. But you have housing, family, work, friendship, and the kind of character that boards a sailing yacht at 7 months pregnant rather than collapse. That is not someone with nothing. That is someone who has not yet realized what they are working with." I stared at him. I said, "How are you this person?" He looked genuinely confused. He said, "What person?" I said, "This person. The one who says things like that." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Most people have never needed me to be this person. So I did not know I was." And there it was. The truest thing he had said in 6 days. That somewhere under the CEO, under the control, under the years of managing grief and running an empire and coming out to sea alone to escape the weight of everyone's expectations, There was a man who had simply never been given the right conditions to be fully himself. The afternoon stretched into evening. We ate together. We talked until the stars came out. There were more stars on that ocean than I had ever seen in my life, like the sky had been saving them all up and decided to spend them all at once. At some point I stopped talking mid-sentence. He asked what was wrong. I told him nothing. I told him I just wanted to look at it for a minute. We sat there in silence, looking at the stars and the water and the absolute dark beauty of being completely away from everything ordinary. I thought, whatever happens after tomorrow, I will carry this. I will carry this specific silence. This specific sky. Neither of us said what we were feeling. Maybe we both knew that saying it would make it something that needed an answer, and we were not ready for answers yet. There was something strangely respectful about leaving it where it was. Acknowledged but unnamed. Present but unhurried. I went to bed just before midnight. I lay in the dark and I thought about my son. About the person he would grow up to be. About the things I would tell him about this week someday when he was old enough to understand that life does the most unexpected things in the moments right before it changes you. I thought about Woosuk. I thought, I hope he finds his way to being this person more often. I hope someone gives him the right conditions again. And then at 12:47 in the morning, my water broke. I need you to understand the weight of that moment. We were not near a port. There was no hospital. There was no doctor. There was no plan. There was a premature baby who had decided that 7 months was enough and the ocean was as good a place as any to enter the world. The next thing I did was something I would not have predicted 24 hours earlier. I called for Woosuk. Not Rashid. Not anyone else. Him. And what happens next is the part of this story I will never be able to tell without feeling it in my entire body all over again. So stay with me. Because this is where everything we built across 6 careful days gets tested in the space of a single night. Do not look away. You have come too far to stop now. His door opened within seconds. He must have been barely asleep. Or maybe not asleep at all. He took one look at me standing in the sitting area and he understood immediately. His entire face shifted into a focus that I had only seen him apply to his most serious calls. Total, absolute, locked-in attention. He said, "How far apart?" I told him I did not know. I told him it just happened. I told him it was too early. The words came out of me in pieces, not sentences, because my body had already started doing something my mind was 3 steps behind on. He guided me back to the bedroom. He was calm. Not cold calm, the kind I had seen in the beginning. Something different. Warm calm. The kind that holds space for someone else's fear without adding to it. Then he picked up his satellite phone and called Sooyeon. It was 1 a.m. Seoul time. She picked up on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep. And then he told her. And I heard her voice change in real time through the phone. From sleepy to awake to professional so fast it was like watching someone shift gears. He put her on speaker. Her voice came through the small speaker of that satellite phone and it reached into the room and steadied something in the air. She said, "Olivia, my name is Sooyeon. I am a midwife. I am right here. Tell me what you are feeling right now." I told her. She listened without interrupting. She asked precise questions. She was building a picture. She was already working, even from thousands of miles away, in the middle of the night, with nothing but a satellite phone signal and her training. She told Woosuk exactly what to gather. She listed things from the supplies on the boat with the calm efficiency of someone used to working with whatever was available. Clean towels. Fresh water. He moved through the suite collecting everything without a single wasted movement. She told me to breathe in a specific pattern. She talked me through the contractions. She told me what was normal and what to watch for. She kept her voice even and steady in a way that I later understood was a skill she had spent years developing, the ability to be the calmest person in the room even when she was not technically in the room. Woosuk knelt beside me. He took my hand. I want you to picture that. This man who had walked into his own suite 6 days ago and told me I was an inconvenience. This man who had kept precise and careful distance for days. Kneeling on the floor of a boat in the middle of the ocean, satellite phone propped on the nightstand, his sister's voice guiding him through something no boardroom had ever prepared him for. His hands were shaking. I felt it. He tried to hide it, but I felt it. I said, "Are you scared?" He looked at me. He said yes. And somehow that was the most comforting thing he could have said. Because it meant he was not performing calm. He was choosing it. For me. Despite being terrified, he was choosing to be steady because I needed steady. That is a different thing entirely. The labor moved fast. Too fast for a first birth, Soo-yeon said, which could mean different things. She kept talking. Kept guiding. At one point she made a small joke, something about Woo-suk always being dramatic about being kept awake, and I heard him make a sound that was almost a laugh even in the middle of all of it. That almost laugh broke something open in me. A warmth in the middle of the fear that I did not know was possible. And then Soo-yeon told him it was time. Her voice was focused and precise, and she talked him through every second. Every single second. This woman who was not in the room was the most present person in it. My son was born at 3:14 in the morning on the open ocean. He was so small. So impossibly, breathtakingly small. Woo-suk held him first. He had to, because Soo-yeon told him what to do, and he did it without hesitation. He held this tiny early baby against his chest because skin contact was the first thing the baby needed and warmth was the first thing they could give him out here. And Woo-suk Kang, Korean CEO, controlled and contained and closed off for longer than he probably remembered, held my son against his chest and looked down at him with an expression I have no word for. I heard Soo-yeon crying softly on the phone. She tried to hide it. She failed. Woo-suk looked up at me. His eyes were wet. He did not look away. He did not try to compose himself. He just looked at me, and I looked at him, and the baby made a sound between us that was the smallest and most enormous sound I had ever heard in my life. I was exhausted. I was overwhelmed. I was somewhere beyond words. I looked at him, and I said, "You did not run." He shook his head slowly. And he said, "I was never going to." Soo-yeon's voice came back through the phone. Steady again. Professional again. She told us what came next. She told us the baby needed warmth and monitoring and that we needed to get to a hospital as fast as the boat could move. She told Rashid, who Woo-suk called immediately, to set course for the nearest port at full speed. She told me what signs to watch for. She stayed on the line. Woo-suk did not put the phone down. He stayed beside me. He held my son when my arms grew too weak to hold him. He talked to him. Quietly in Korean, barely above a whisper, in the voice of a man speaking to something he had decided mattered. The boat cut through the water toward land, and I lay there listening to the engine and the ocean and Soo-yeon's steady voice and Woo-suk's quiet Korean words to a baby who was not his, and I thought, this is real. Whatever this is. This is the most real thing that has happened to me in years. We reached the port as the sun was coming up. Rashid had called ahead. There was a medical team on the dock. They took my son immediately, fast, careful, professional, and I watched them carry him toward the ambulance with the particular calm urgency of people who knew exactly what they were doing, and I held on to that. I held on to their competence the way I had held on to Woo-suk's arm in the storm. My son was placed in an incubator within the hour. His lungs were underdeveloped, as Soo-yeon had told us to expect. He would need monitoring, support, time. But he was alive. He was breathing. He was here. The doctors told me he was small, but he was strong. That the skin-to-skin contact in those early hours had helped regulate his temperature. That his chances were good. I sat beside his incubator in the NICU, and I looked at him through the clear walls, this tiny person who had come into the world on open water with only a terrified CEO and a satellite phone for help, and I felt something settle in me. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter. Something that felt like the beginning of okay. Woo-suk stayed at the hospital until he knew we were both stable. He spoke to the doctors in a way that made clear he would be ensuring we had everything we needed. He did not make a performance of it. He just made it happen. Quietly. The way he did everything. When he came to the door of the room where I was resting, he stood there for a moment just looking at me. There was something unresolved in his face. Something that had not been given a name yet, and was not sure it was ready for one. I asked him what he would do now. He said he had calls to make. A company to return to. A life that had been waiting for him all week. I nodded. He said, Soo-yeon wants to come. She wants to see the baby. She wants to see you. I smiled at that. I said I would like that very much. He nodded. He looked at me one more time. Then he said, "What will you name him?" I had been thinking about it since the moment I heard him cry. I had a name I had been holding since the 2nd month of my pregnancy, a name I had never told Daniel because something in me had known, even then, that Daniel did not deserve to be part of the naming. It was my name, my son's name, chosen by me alone. I told Woo-suk the name. He repeated it quietly. He said it suited him. And then he turned and walked down the corridor, and I watched him go, and I did not know what any of it meant or where any of it would lead or whether the ocean had given us something that the land would know what to do with. But here is what I knew. I knew that I had gone out to sea broken, and I had come back to shore with my son in an incubator and a week of memories that had shown me what it felt like to be seen. Truly, quietly, completely seen. Not because of my name or my family or how I looked or what I could offer someone. But because I was there. And so was he. And the ocean held us long enough for something real to happen. I knew that I was not the woman who had been left on the floor of her kitchen 3 weeks ago. I was not the woman who thought love looked like Daniel. I was not the woman who had confused performance for presence. I was a woman who had just brought a child into the world on the open sea, with nothing but courage and a stranger's steady hands and a midwife's voice through a satellite phone. And I was going to be absolutely fine. More than fine. What comes next for Olivia, for Woo-suk, for the baby in the incubator and the sister flying in from Seoul, that is a story for another day. But if you have made it to the end of this one, if you have been with me from the marina to the ocean to that hospital corridor, then you already know that this is only the beginning. Subscribe to Afri-Seoul right now if you want to be here when the next chapter drops. Every subscribe means this story reaches someone new. Someone who needs it. Someone who is maybe sitting somewhere right now feeling like their life is on the floor. Tell them the ocean has a way of changing things. Tell them to keep moving. Even when they do not know where they are going. Especially then.